Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Jon Denton, and on this video I'm going to be talking about RUINER, the new cyberpunk anime top-down twin-stick shooter from new developer Reikon Games, a small team from Poland who've been made up of ex-developers from The Witcher and Dead Island. So, to talk about this game, I think you need to talk about Devolver Digital, who are publishing the game. And this is a publisher unlike any other. This is a publisher that's defined by its output. This is a publisher with an aesthetic, and we don't really see that from an EA, Ubisoft and Activision. Devolver kind of came to the fore with Hotline Miami. I would argue that it came to the fore with Hotline Miami, a game that's gone on to define that aesthetic, really sort of violent, aggressive, electronic, punk rock, but a modern style of punk rock, sort of punk electronica, trying to push boundaries within gaming, but a sort of commitment to indie games. You know, as a publisher, their output has ranged in quality, but that kind of aesthetic, that kind of punk aesthetic has definitely been there through all of it. And RUINER is definitely the sort of latest and potentially the greatest example of that since Hotline Miami. So onto the game itself. It's a very, very red sort of top-down. Top-down isn't the word, it's like isometric shooter, a twin-stick shooter brawler that's very much about violence, very, very hard, that kind of brutal difficulty that you expect from this sort of game. And also with a commitment to its own aesthetic, a commitment to its own style that really does help elevate it above perhaps the sum of its parts. Now, let's talk about the influences. They're pretty clear. It labels itself as a kind of cyberpunk anime game, and you can just watch the trailer or listen to this thumping, brutal techno music that soundtracks the whole thing to kind of get an idea of the vibe. But the influences in terms of gameplay as well are clear. Hotline Miami is an obvious one. You know, it's brutal difficulty, the violent, the twisted, nasty style, the music, everything like that. There's a lot of Housemarque in there. The new game Nex Machina, the sort of dash mechanic which defines how you play RUINER, is very much a callback to a lot of stuff that we've seen in Housemarque's amazing output, and there's even a vibe of Syndicate in there, just in terms of the perspective and in terms of the synths, and just in terms of the overall mood of the piece. But it's nastier than Syndicate. That grimy, that thudding bass, I call it brutal techno, and I can't think of a better way to describe it. It's an amazing soundtrack, and it scores this relentless action. So the story is surprisingly well told, mainly through written dialogue. It's very simple. Basically, you are this creature, this man with a head that has a screen on it that can sort of express words, and you're being told the whole time to find your brother. To do that, you basically go and kill everything. But there's always a sort of a question exactly what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it. You spend the whole time with a woman who talks to you through cutscenes, and even these are done with style. I should say there are actually animated cutscenes which aren't that good, but the written sort of flashing up single screen cutscenes with dialogue are done really well. They cut just before they should, just to make everything feel that much more abrupt. It's very, very cool, and everything fits within that style. And when you're out on the battlefield, which 90% of the time you will be, other times you spend in this very small but stylish hub area, which is sort of a kind of modern Bangkok or Bangkok, so you think of a Seoul sort of place, that kind of cyberpunk Asia. But most of the time you're on the battlefield, and in that time you are blasting the hell out of everything that can come your way and dashing with L1 the whole time. You've got three dashes, you can upgrade it to 4 or 5, and you need to be constantly moving. There's even developer notes that came with the game. It's like dash, constantly move, that is the game, especially on normal difficulty. There's 3 difficulties, easy, normal and hard. Hard, I can't even imagine how difficult it is, but we'll talk about the difficulty in a minute. But even during the first mission, the first area, the first levels, the first enemies, it's extremely difficult, and you need to keep on the move the whole time. You have a melee as well, so you can get up close and slash things, but if you're not moving, you're basically dead. When it's flowing at its best, when that music is hitting, when the violence is visceral, when that movement and flow state sort of courses through your blood, then RUINER is something extremely special indeed, and it really, really nails both its aesthetic, to use that word again, but also the style of gameplay that it's going for. Unfortunately, I think perhaps the developers, Reikon Games, haven't quite pitched the difficulty just right. About halfway through the game, it really does start to spike brutally to use that word again, it spikes menacingly, and single sections of the levels, and the levels are broken down into very short sections where you're graded the whole time. Think like a platinum game. Single sections of the levels were taking me 20 to 30 goes at a time. I got better. You can grind the currency in the game and up your skill points, and you can actually respec a whole skill tree. It's really nicely done. But don't get me wrong, this is extremely difficult, and very quickly you're dealing with teleporting, fast-moving enemies, and it almost borders on the unfair, and there's some little niggles in there where, for a game this hard, for a game that requires this much concentration, having the health and energy where you use your powers up in the top left, you're constantly having to glance up to the top left of the screen when your concentration should be in the middle, and it feels like Reikon knows this, because whenever you grab a pickup, that flashes up in the middle of the screen, and so it's slightly distracting to having to move the whole time. It results in many deaths where you didn't quite know how much trouble you were in. Admittedly, you get used to it, but I'd love it if there was sort of an on character or centre of character health bar. It would make such a difference. And in that difficulty, you kind of lose, when it gets to that extreme, you do lose some of what makes RUINER so special. I think its first mission is probably where it's at its most successful, because it is hard, it is challenging, it is demanding, but it's not so much so that you're having to repeat every section multiple times or just get so much better at the game. Whacking it down too easy, it's got that classic problem. It is then just way too easy. It really is. You still need to move and shoot, and I would say probably people would still find it a difficult game, but compared to normal, it's a cakewalk. Sub-bosses that would take 15-20 goes and push you to the absolute limits on normal are going to be taken out in a single go. Unless you really make a mistake on easy, you're basically going to be able to do the whole thing. You still get that mood, that tone when you're playing through on easy, but you just don't get the challenge, which is actually so much of what adds to that tone. So I would love to see the developers maybe tweak the difference slightly down from normal, but then again, maybe I'm just getting too old, but I really do think that normal is probably ever slightly too hard, especially when there's a whole level above it that you can go to, which incidentally is what the developer recommends. I personally wouldn't recommend going in on hard, because you're likely to want to peel your own skin off with the difficulty. So, overall, the difficulty, Disney tweaking, maybe some small little changes here and there, and perhaps the game doesn't, as well pitched and as well stylized as it is, perhaps there are times where it doesn't fully commit to that tone. There are times where you're perhaps a little too heroic. There are times where there's like 95% of that brutal, nasty ultra-violence that makes it really stand out. And you know, a game like Hotline Miami never deviated from that, and RUINER does ever so slightly, but this is a tiny criticism. This is a tiny stylistic criticism, and not really anything that I really want to harp on about, because what we have here, barring some tweaks to difficulty, or maybe you're just going to be a better player than me, we have a mechanically very, very solid and very satisfying game, elevated by an amazing tone, incredible music, and a very, very brutal, to use that word one more time, a brutal style. It's highly, highly recommended if you like this type of game. If you're into games, challenge both you physically, challenge your dexterity, but also challenge what you think a game can be and how they can make you feel. So if that sounds like it appeals to you, then I would highly, highly recommend RUINER, and maybe they'll tweak the difficulty on the back end. Okay, thank you very much for watching and listening to this video. As I said, my name is Jon Denton. If you enjoyed it, all that YouTube stuff, it would be great if you hit the like button, and of course subscribing to the channel would be amazing. You can catch me on here, you can catch me on twitch.tv as my name, Jon Denton, and hopefully I will catch you on the next video. Okay, peace!